Alrighty, we're live. Give me a second to set up my lights. I'm late, so I'm sorry. That's a bit better. How's that? Is that too bright? Yes, that's too bright. Okay. How about we go? Whoop! All right, that's as good as we're going to get it for the moment, I think. G'day, Herman. And hello, Joel and Albert. Yes, so we've got 8 people online tonight. And tonight's topic is double-deckers. But before we get into that, I'll just double-check that I don't have any updates. I might not. Oh yeah, one small update, which is that I extended a few sightings around the Somerton area and just updated various sightings around the upfield Somerton type area. And I did some work on Somerton Yard as well. So Somerton is the theme of tonight's updates. G'day, Comenge. So, double-decker trains. Why are they ubiquitous in New South Wales and Sydney, but not in Melbourne and Victoria? It's complicated. There are a number of reasons that it's the case, but I think we should first dispel a few double-decker myths. Myth number one, that a lot of railway enthusiasts won't believe this myth, but a lot of the general public do. Melbourne has never had any double-decker trains. False. Sort of. We had one. Not one type of train, well, yes, one type of train, but we just had one set, 4 carriages that were double-deck. It was named the 4D train. The 4Ds stood for, can I get it right? No, I can't. Excuse me for a second while I look up what the 4D was. I should have done this earlier, but I was busy with uni. Because I always forget. 4D train. Here we go. It's like double-deck development and demonstration. That's it. I always can't remember the 4th D. Double-deck development and demonstration. So who would have guessed that we'd have a 4D train? It's not 4-dimensional, but it's, well, I guess it is, depending on, is 3 physical dimensions and 1 time dimension. Anyway, 4D train is what it was called, and it looked very similar to a Tangara train from Sydney. A few people say that it was a Tangara. That's not very true. It definitely looked very similar, and from the outside, that would be easy to mistake them as being the same, but there were some minor and major differences. The minor differences were that it was slightly narrower and perhaps slightly shorter. I'm not sure about the shorter, but it was definitely narrower. That's because Melbourne's loading gauge, which is the maximum width and height and whatever that trains can be, the loading gauge of Melbourne is smaller than that of Sydney's. But yeah, so it was roughly, the design was, it was built by I think A. Gernon and Co. Should look that up as well. Doing research on the fly here. Yeah, A. Gernon and Co. Which is the same people that built the Tango. However, the major differences were in the electrical systems. The electrical systems were much similar to that of a Comenge train, and we'll get into why that's very significant a bit later on. The second myth that I want to dispel is that Melbourne can't have double-decker trains because, you know, our loading gauge is too small, and they would be too tall to fit in our tunnels. I've heard that one a few times. I was attending a open day type thing, like a display event for Melbourne's new HCMT trains a couple of years ago, and I remember somebody asking one of the staff there, "Oh, why isn't this a double-decker train?" And the staff member replied, "Oh, because we tried double-decker trains once and it didn't fit in the tunnels." Sort of true, it has an element of truth, but yeah, so it was slightly too wide, too tall, I believe, to fit in the tunnels. Like, it could, but the clearances were a bit small, so they ended up lowering the tracks. I should mention that it was primarily run on the Belgrave and Lilydale lines, so it was going through tunnels at East Richmond, I'm pretty sure, or whatever, it doesn't really matter where the tunnels were. The point is that, yeah, they had to lower the tracks a little bit, but that's not insane as far as railway engineering goes. You know, anything can be done. G'day, Jay. And yeah, there's just been a brand new tunnel built in Heidelberg or Eltham, one of the two. That was because they wanted to, I think it's along that section of track, I'm pretty sure. There was a heritage tunnel that was only obviously big enough for one track, but they wanted to duplicate it. So they just extended the cutting and built another tunnel. So it's not like it's not certainly not impossible to do double-decker trains in Melbourne. So just looking at the comments, Herman's channel said that was an odd case, as I think they were just chopper Comenges underneath. Yeah, I'm not sure about whether they were specifically chopper electricals, but they were definitely Comenge electricals. If they were chopper Comenge electricals, then that's even more reason why they failed. But again, we'll get into that. G'day, Finley. Albert says that's the current problem in Sydney. Their newest trains don't fit in tunnels in the Blue Mountains, so we're lowering the track bed as well. There you go. And Sydney, of course, has double-decker trains. Although, interestingly, they chose single-deck for their metro train. That's a discussion for another time. Roderick Smith says, as far as I know, there are standard Sydney electricals. The Comenge compatibility came from an emulator. Oh, okay. Finley says things Queensland trains can do and not. I'm not sure what you're trying to say there. Yeah, well, a lot of the issues with the 4D stemmed from the Comenge compatibility, I believe, because the 4D was notorious for breaking down, and that was the real reason why it failed, was because it kept breaking down so often. It was a real lemon, but yeah, it's unfortunate that it did. It was a bit botched, the whole 4D project, because it was a lot of managers and politicians demanding stuff, despite advice from people who know what they are doing saying otherwise. That's a pretty common theme in the railways, but yeah, just had more disastrous effects for the 4D. Anyway, the second real big myth that I want to touch on is that double decks, while they hold more people, they are slower to unload than single deck trains, and that's why they weren't such a good fit for Melbourne, and that's the argument that's been put forward for the Sydney Metro. Not quite true either. Yes, for the same carriage length, for an equal carriage length, a single deck train with 3 doors per side is going to be faster to unload than a double deck train with 2 doors per side. Having said that, number one, the standard set of the 4D or any double-decker train in Sydney is 4 carriages rather than 3, which is the standard in Melbourne, yet they are roughly the same length overall. Like a 3-car set is roughly the same length as a 4-car set double-deck. So that's where you end up having roughly the same amount of doors per unit area, unit length, I should say. And so in the end, the unloading times of double-decker trains aren't insane. They're not insanely bad compared to single-deck trains. Having said all that, if you know your Melbourne trains, you know that the Siemens trains only have 2 doors per carriage. They are a standard length 3-car set, but with only 2 doors per side per carriage. And yeah, are they slower to unload than the 3-door carriages? Yes, but it's a matter of like 10, 15 seconds, and that's only when you're at Flinders Street or something, or, you know, at the terminus and everyone's getting off, there's a big bottleneck. That's when your doors become the bottleneck. But yeah, in the end, over the course of the journey, it's not like it increases the journey time, the timetabled journey time for a double-deck train. It might increase the stopping time a little bit at the busiest stations, but yeah. Roderick Smith says, the 4 loop tunnels all held double-deck. The problem with the West Richmond tunnels was curvature. The set could well have fitted the straight Heidelberg tunnel. There you go. The City Loop, interestingly enough, was made with a lot of provisions in mind, thankfully, one of the few bits of forward thinking in our railway network. They have got the platform lengths to cover the new 7-car HCMTs. I believe, if I'm not wrong, the City Loop has got provision for up to 9 car sets, and the Metro Tunnel will have provision for up to 11 car sets, if I'm correct. But that's a little tangent. JJ says, it's a shame one car wasn't preserved from that double-decker set in Melbourne. I remember seeing it. Yeah, I'll get into preservation and stuff a little bit later on. BK3YE says, basically at the wrong time, conceived when patronage was rising. When it arrived, patronage was falling / stagnant, and the government was cutting back on everything, especially transport, during the 90s recession. Yes, that's another reason why it failed, was that it was at the wrong time. But it's just really interesting that it's had such a profound impact that the managers that do remember it claim that Melbourne can't have double-decker trains. And Finley says, it's so hard to catch the Melbourne transport. Than here on Queensland Rail. I still don't know what you're trying to say. Albert says, however, a lot of congestion where people meet when exiting both levels, plus Sydney's seating arrangement 3+2 means that when people are standing in the aisle exiting the train is slow. Yes, Sydney seating is another thing. Oops, sorry, I'm getting a call. Let me just put my phone to do not disturb. Okay. Yes. All right. Let's turn that on. All right. So yeah, that is an issue with Sydney trains, but ultimately, even if you did have, like, 2+2 seating does make it slightly less congestive, but at the same time, you're always going to have congestion around the doors. It doesn't matter unless you go back to the Tate and swing door style, a door for every row. You know, those were the ultimate in unloading times. Just bam, everyone out at the same time, and you even had what do you call it? I forget what I was trying to say. But they would have a lot of congestion on the platform itself. So, oh yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that the Tate and swing doors were unlocked all the time, so people could get off while the train was still technically moving. So yeah, you look at footage of like a train, Tate or a swing door arriving at like Flemington Racecourse for an event or something, and train pulls up and then just the whole train just exits all at once, and it's quite cool to see. And so Brian says, "G'day, I rode the double-decker in Melbourne in the early 1990s. Yeah, cool. Finley's rambling on about something. I thought you would have a train whistle for a ringtone. No, I've just got a fairly boring standard ringtone. Yes. Herman says, unless you get the bank wrong and you can't get the door open, well, yeah. Brian says, remember Red Rattlers too? I'm old. JJ says, Tate cars were similar to the wooden Queensland cars with swing doors. Okay. Netherlands says Roderick led the way on easing congestion using wider stairwells leading directly to the doors. Later Sydney versions adopted that. There you go. And ultimately, there's going to be congestion at the station itself as well. Like, you look at Southern Cross during peak times and everyone's got to file onto the one escalator effectively, or, maybe two, but still. The escalators are obviously a point of congestion at Southern Cross. Everything's peak time, you're going to have congestion. That's just a fact. And yeah, so where was I up to? Double-decker trains, yeah, they just failed in Melbourne. And another big reason why double-decker trains worked in Sydney yet didn't in Melbourne was just because Sydney ordered double-deck as a full set. Like, they didn't just order one as a prototype testing, running around the network for a bit, see how it goes. They just ordered a large number. And like I was saying in the last live stream about Sydney ordering electric multiple units over locomotives and locomotive hauled carriages, that's another reason that you'll find double decks are still around in Sydney today, even on the regional lines, is because, it was just cheaper and easier to keep them going, and they'd already had success with double decks, so they thought, oh yeah, we'll keep going. Whereas Melbourne never really, we only had the one trial of the double-decker trains. So I think that we didn't give them a fair run. VK3 says Southern Cross is badly designed. Should have had 3 exits per platform, not 2. We've got a fancy roof for our $700 million, not a fully functional station. Yeah, there's a bunch of issues with Southern Cross. I won't get into them fully tonight. But yeah, the double-decker trains in Melbourne, they were poor. They had poor reliability. The public reception, apart from, obviously being annoyed at the reliability issues, the public reception was quite good. And yeah, everyone liked the idea of a double-decker train, but the people who do know that it existed, they often speak favourably of it. JJ says the French TGV duplex is the best example of a high-speed double-deck train. They had to make huge weight savings to build them, lighter seats, thinner insulation on the cables, etc., aluminium bodies. Yeah, Finley, I don't know what you're trying to say, and it doesn't seem to be of relevance to this live stream, so that's why I keep ignoring all your comments. Roderick also says, one problem in Melbourne is that our escalators are too slow at half the speed of those in Moskva. Okay, see you, Finley. Yeah. Now, I guess I'll double check these notes just to see if there's anything else I really want to talk about. Yeah, I feel like they didn't really get a fair chance to run on different lines. Yeah, it was run on a couple of other lines, not just Belgrave and Lilydale. Like I used to live in Carnegie, and my dad used to commute to the city, so he remembers getting on them, the double deck arriving one day and getting on it and thinking, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe he's confusing it with Belgrave, because I don't think we really lived. He was commuting to the city at the time that the double decker was around. But anyway. Yeah, it had a slightly different carriage configuration, being the normal carriage configuration of Melbourne was MTM, motor trailer motor, but the 4D was DTM which is driving trailer, motor trailer, driving trailer. And so, yeah, only the trailers had motors. That was definitely not a big reason for its failure. I mean, yes, the Siemens and subsequent Siemens and Extrapolis trains were using the MTM configuration, but the newest HCMTs are using a similar configuration to the double-decker, but slightly different. I don't know what the exact configuration is without looking it up. Yeah, so again, it had a lot of compatibility issues with the Comeng, and the idea of the Comeng compatibility was sort of twofold. Number one, yeah, 4D, a double-decker train is great, but we only had a 4-car set, and in the peak times you really want to run, if it's a double-decker, an 8-car set at the least, or a 6-car set if it's single-deck. But the thing with that is that, yeah, because we couldn't get 2 units to just join together nice and easy, it had to be with a Comeng, so you'd have a 4D and a Comeng joined together. Now, some people sort of understandably see that all Melbourne trains have got the same coupler design. It's a Schaffenberg coupler, something like that, and go, oh, well, why can't they just join together? Yeah, they might be able to physically couple together, but their electrics won't communicate properly, and they'll probably get air pass through. I think for the brakes, I think that'd that's pretty standard. But electricals, no, unfortunately. And I don't think that it should be made standard either. Well, I'm not the most qualified person to make such a remark, but I just feel like if you enforce a standard of electrical compatibility, then it stifles innovation, basically. So you're not going to get a good system, you're just going to get a compatible system. And would you rather compatible but bad, or would you rather not compatible but good? So that's just my little thought. Roderick says, Sydney pioneered double-deck motor carriages in the world. All earlier examples were loco push-pull. They dated from about 1928 through the 1930s and then the 1950s extensively. Herman's Channel says the HCMT is driver trailer, then two motor trailers, one trailer, then two motor trailers, then driving trailer. There you go. Finley asks, how long have the New South Wales Oscar sets been in service? I'm not exactly sure. It's one of the Sydney people can answer that one. JJ says the electrical connections have to be identical on the chassis. Otherwise, it's hopeless. To what degree, though? Because a Siemens definitely can't just connect up to a Comenge or an Extrapolis or anything like that. They have to be the same. So what's the difference? And yeah, just a little interesting side note. In terms of connecting Chaffenberg couplers, there was an incident maybe 2 years ago on the Sandringham line where a Comenge pulled down the overhead at around Brighton Beach, somewhere around there. And so no electrical trains could go in to rescue it. But they managed to get one of the Stony Point allocated V-line sprinters and run it down the wrong way, or like, I think it's called like Bang Road or something, the opposite direction to which the line was signalled for. And so there was obviously special, what do you call it, operations and, safety procedures and whatnot. That's the word I was looking for, procedures. Herman says it's wrong road, I think. Yeah, wrong road. Okay, there you go, wrong road. Bang Road must be from tramways, I think. And there you go, Finley's timed out. After that last comment. And yeah, the double-deck trains, well, they also had Chaffenberg couplers, but just what I was saying is that the Sprinter, being a diesel, the Chaffenberg coupler managed to push the Comenge into the sidings at Sandringham where it could be repaired, and then the overhead was repaired afterwards, and the Sprinters hung around at Sandringham for a little bit, and I did get a photo of them at Sandringham Station in the yard, so that's nice. But yeah, the big issues with I believe a lot of the big issues with the 4D train was connecting to the Comenge. It was just, however it did it, whether it tried to emulate it or whether it was using Comenge electricals, I believe that it was a source of reliability issues, and so yeah, it was a nice idea to have them compatible with Ecoenge, but in practice, just didn't go that well. Roderick Smith says Bain Road is tram slang for the same operation. Yeah, there you go. So, yeah, why were double deck trains failing? Yeah, all of those reasons. JJ says there are things called transition/emergency couplers which clip over the front of the chassis in the event that a dieseler is required to rescue an EMU. Yes, I'm aware that transition couplers exist for locomotives with knuckle couplers. I don't know what the technical term is. I've just heard them referred to as that, or auto couplers. But yeah, it was, yeah, that would, I've seen transition couplers used for like an N class to pull around a velocity, for example, as well. So yeah, it's and thinking of which, if Metro still had the contract with CFCLA for the B class and the two Ts, was it two B classes? I think it might be two Bs and two Ts. Anyway, probably one of them would be used, but yeah, whatever, the Sprinter was on hand, so it worked, and it was an interesting operation, put it that way. Roderick says there are several variations in multifunction couplers. Schaffenberg is just one. Adelaide had Tomlinson couplers on its H trams from the 1920s. There you go. Yeah, Schaffenberg just seems to be a popular one in Australia and even worldwide. Now, the last thing I want to get onto is why weren't they saved? Why wasn't one saved? You know, at least have it as a piece of history in Melbourne Railways. The reason why it wasn't saved is, again, complicated. I believe that there was a number of people within the Newport Railway Museum who were trying to really push for it to be preserved, but at the same time, it also stems back to the reason why we still haven't properly got a Hitachi preserved. To a certain extent, a Harris, but that's a different story entirely. But mainly, it's so that one of the reasons for this is because a lot of the people in the preservation world tend to be older, and unfortunately, they tend to. There's definitely a number of people who tend to be very exclusive to what they view as the old stuff, and they don't like the new stuff. And double decks to them was the new stuff, and they didn't really like it. So, yeah, and communications with different railway managers and whatnot, it's an ongoing issue within preservation groups today. Not so much wanting to preserve the newer stuff. Some people, actively campaigning against it almost. And for that matter, you tend not to see them on Facebook because, again, they're old. and older people tend not to have Facebook. Of course, not all of them, not all old people, but yeah, it's definitely a common recurring theme. Albert says the 4D was nearly granted a life extension as Sydney was interested in purchasing Engage converting it to run on the Carlingford line at one stage, but opted to just buy parts to use on Tangaras. Yeah, interesting. That was another reason why it was ultimately scrapped, was because there was interest for the parts, and yeah, because it's not like parts were unavailable for the older staff, because Tangaras and whatnot and Commagers, they were both reasonably new. Like, they weren't brand spanking new, but they weren't that old either. They were only like 15 or 20 years old. So it's not like parts were becoming hard to get. It was just that the parts were cheaper to get if it was scrapped. So that's why there was a bit of interest in the parts. But yeah, there's even so, I've heard various different accounts for exactly how much stuff the Tangara and 4D shared, apart from the shell. And yeah, maybe a bit of interior stuff, but exactly in terms of valuable parts, how much did they share? I'm not entirely certain. JJ said the Melbourne double deck certainly had a unique place in history of Victorian railways, just like the Spirit of Progress. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't quite as famous as the Spirit of Progress, definitely, but it's made a lasting impact, that's for sure. Roderick says, for once I disagree with Floyd. The lack of preservation wasn't from the hobby end, it was from management. The set was funded by Victoria. Management wanted to obliterate all traces. I wouldn't disagree with that either. I think that the preservation, a couple of people in preservation contributed, but I certainly don't think that they were the sole reason. And again, there were plenty of people within preservation that absolutely wanted it preserved, and tried really hard to save it. But yeah, management, it was an embarrassment for management, and yeah, they did want to obliterate a lot of traces. Finley asks, how long were the Tangara units in service? They're still in service. They started coming into service around the late 70s, early 80s, I believe, and they're still in service. I believe that the newest Sydney trains are sort of set to start replacing them, but yeah, there's still a lot of them, pretty much all of them, still in service, like the Comminge trains in Melbourne. So yeah, Melbourne, I guess to finish off, just talking about the newest HCMTs in Melbourne and the metro trains in Sydney. Why did both Melbourne and Sydney again say no to double deck? Well, because it's the double deck still for Melbourne, as I've said all along through this live stream, the double deck has left a lasting stigma amongst management that it can't be done. The double deck was tried once, it was a failure, don't try it again. So that's one of the reasons. I'm not entirely sure if there were any tenders which specifically proposed double deck, or whether it was a specific requirement of the tender that it had to be single deck. Quite possibly the latter. But yeah, Albert says that Tangaras are not being replaced anytime soon. They are just starting a technology upgrade on them, like a life extension program. Okay. Are there any plans to have a new type of train start replacing them? Because like even the colleges here in Melbourne are receiving a life extension program, but the HCMT sets are due to eventually start replacing them, but in the next 10 years or so. Loading gauge is sort of a reason why they failed. Yes, Melbourne's loading gauge would need to be modified a little bit to be they need to be modified a little bit to handle double deckers in places, but yeah, it wouldn't be huge, and it's not like the loading gauge hasn't been changed before. There's been a few times when in Queensland, I believe their new trains were discovered to be a bit too wide, so they've had to shave back the platforms a bit. I think that's happened a couple of times in Melbourne as well. JJ says, in Queensland, narrow gauge prohibits deck along with the clearance gauge. It's too small. Yeah. Queensland has an even smaller loading gauge, which you call clearance gauge, than Victoria does. But yes, ultimately, actually no, the narrow being, double deck. Narrow gauge doesn't necessarily prohibit double deck trains, because the way that you find pretty much every double decker train does it is that they will have a single deck section over the bogies and double deck underneath. Between the bogies, I should say. Having said that, it would be a matter of the loading gauge of narrow gauge that would be the limiting factor in Brisbane. But I believe that Brisbane can't have double decks a lot quicker than I believe Melbourne can't have double decks, put it that way. Roderick Smith says, I entered a competition to design a double deck train which fitted the QR structure gauge, the world's first double deck carriage of the style, which we know was South Africa on 1067 millimetres. There you go, Jay. Narrow gauge is definitely not prohibiting double deck. So yeah, Tangaras. I'm not sure whether the 4D being based on a Tangara contributed much to its success or failure, to the odds, I should say, of success or failure for a double deck train. I just think that we should have ordered a whole bunch of them all at once without doing extensive testing of just a single set. Because the other big problem with single set that I haven't really touched on is just the fact that, parts are going to be expensive to source because you've only got one. You're not going to be buying bulk parts. So, yeah, sure, they shared a lot of parts with other trains, and that was probably one of the main reasons for basing it on a Tangara, not something completely independent, was so that it at least had some part compatibility and parts wouldn't be ludicrously expensive for what it is. But yeah, parts are going to be expensive, and I think management saw that as well without really thinking about it and just thought, oh, parts are expensive for double deck, when really it was like, no, it's not inherent to double deck. Griffin Rail says the T set Tangara inspired the 4D inspired the G set. There you go. So yeah, we're at 51 minutes. I think that's about all that I had to say specifically on double deck trains, but I'll read a few comments to fill in a bit of time. Albert says, maintenance becomes a nightmare for white elephant trains. Just having to keep parts for one single set, people trained in repairs, etc., becomes expensive. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that the S-Class is the S-Class steam engines in Victoria ultimately failed, was because, okay, there were 4 of them, not 1. I mean, they were just expensive to get parts for because there wasn't that many of them. H220 suffered a similar fate, although thankfully H220 was preserved, but unfortunately the S-Classes were not. JJ says centre of gravity is an issue for narrow gauge trains too. Yes, although I wouldn't think that the centre of gravity for a double deck train is too much higher, because yes, it's taller, but you've also got more mass that's slung below the platform level. So yeah, to what degree that compensates, I wouldn't think that it would be a huge issue, certainly not one that was impossible to overcome. And I mean, Queensland has done the tilt train, so they solved sort of the issue of having curves, lots of small radius curves. I'm sure they could come up with a decent solution for centre of gravity if it was an issue. Brian asks, what do you think of Les's video on the South Gippy line? I thought it was great. It was very funny to relive those memories. I was given a bit of a preview as to the ending voiceover. And obviously, like, I was on the hike, I knew exactly what happened. So that part obviously wasn't a surprise to me, but the voiceover at the end, yeah, Les rang me up one day and just said, I've got a voiceover I want you to listen to, and it was that one. And I was like, all right. But yeah, it was a very fun hike, the South Gippsland hike, and I'm definitely looking forward to the next episode. I was on the phone to Les today, and he said that he's going to try and get it done this weekend, maybe not for Sunday morning, but yeah, we'll see. Braxton also asks, do you watch Laurie's Mechanical Marvels train videos? They're pretty cool. No, I do not. I'll have to check them out. WB's whatever says you're going to be talking about velocities. I don't have any plans to specifically talk about velocities. I mean, I guess one day I can talk about diesel multiple units versus locomotive hauled versus, well, I should say traditional locomotive hauled versus like XPT or diesel tilt style. But even so, like my basic verdict on that is that XPT / diesel tilt style is ultimately the best because you get all the benefits of a diesel multiple unit without the drawbacks of a diesel multiple unit. And it's sort of the best of both worlds. It's locomotive hauled, so you don't get as much vibration, you don't get as much fuel consumption, but yeah, it's not the main disadvantage of traditional locomotive haul is it not being a complete set. You don't have the locomotive paired with the carriages all the time, and the loco has to run around, etc. So you're going to have two crews, and yeah, there's, in terms of that, yeah, that's my rough verdict with that. And everyone likes to complain about velocities. Look, I don't think they're the worst thing in the world, but they're not the best thing in the world either. The seats, yeah, they're not that comfortable, but they're all right. They can be a bit rock hard when they're brand new, and they can be a bit jarring in the back with a few metal bits when they're too old, but get the sweet spot and they're all right. The velocity certainly made a big impact for V-Line, and that's why management are so in love with the velocity, and velocity has almost become synonymous with new regional train. Yeah. I guess I had more to say about velocities than I thought. I do plan to do live streams sometime on just a whole bunch of shorter discussions that might not necessarily take up a full hour. But yeah, that could be something that I delve into a little bit more detail there. By the way, says JJ, that's a great Nimrod theatre poster you have there. Yeah, it's Mum's poster. It's we don't really have a proper place for it, so that's why it's sort of in here. We've had it for a while, and it's previously been just at the end of a hallway, but which is sort of like just out there. But whenever the dog runs down the hallway chasing after a ball or something, the ball often hits it when it's stored there. So I think it's been moved just to stop it from breaking one day. But yeah, I don't know. Still doesn't have a proper place, and it's in here for now. Albert says Sydney is getting dual diesel electric / electric trains for the non-electrified lines. They will be able to operate as electric trains under the wires, diesel trains when away from the overhead. Yes, and I think that's sort of the worst of both worlds, not the best, unfortunately. Yeah, I can delve more detail into that in a shorter discussion. In fact, let me just write these things down. Velocity. And there we go. Jay says the seats on Sydney's Oscars are very hard, like the NGR seats in Brisbane. Yeah, I don't think I've travelled on an Oscar set in Sydney, but I've definitely travelled on an NGR, and yeah, they were not that comfortable. They were just very upright. That was my main thing. Was like, okay, it's a hard seat as well, but it was so upright for the whole journey. So, Griffin Rails says maybe talk about Streamliners in Australia. Yeah, could. I'll add that to the list of shorter discussions. Herman's channel says also A66 is coming back soon. I hope I can go see something to do with its relaunch. Yes. See you, Braxton. A66 is indeed coming back after it retired for the 12th time, something like that. Who knows how many times it's actually retired? I haven't counted. But yeah, it's returned. I always thought that it would return, to be completely honest. So I wasn't too surprised. The fact that they stored it undercover in Bendigo and didn't just sell it off immediately like they did with the P classes, that shows you that they had somewhat of an intent to keep it. And I heard something a while back, and I stress this was a while back, that it was being kept around to cover for a few sprinter runs while they get refurbished. But I don't know whether that's still happening or what, because a few new velocities have been delivered in the meantime as well. Yeah, Herman says I'll store it outside like the others. Yeah, like the other A classes that were stored outside and stripped for parts and whatnot, and then moved on to preservation groups as well. If they really wanted to get rid of it, they would have either sold it or given it to heritage groups. And I still believe it will make its way to heritage groups in the end, but yeah, that's going to be a couple of years down the track. Who knows? I've just heard that it's going to be running either to Baggers Marsh or Seymour. Hasn't quite been decided yet. But whenever the next timetable change is due, which I think is mid to late November, that's when it will return to revenue service. At the moment, it's just been reactivated and brought back to Melbourne. Anyway, we're past the hour mark, so I think I will end it off here. Next week will be my long-promised discussion on rail trails. I know I've been saying I'll do it for a while, so next week, well, next fortnight, I should say. That's going to be an interesting discussion. Just before I go, Herman's Chan says, I would like to see A60 rebuilt at B-class specifications, but with the A-class -2 electrics. I think it's just going to stay as an A-class. And haven't been to Wollongong, says David. No, I haven't. WB says, I hope the PNA stays around. Who knows? It might. Yeah, Albert says rail trails would be a controversial topic. Well, that's why I'm discussing it, partially. And the final thing you might notice, the book down there, Saving Puffing Billy the First Decade. I'm thinking of doing a book review on that and a couple of other railway books. So let me know if you're interested in that sort of thing. But yes, it's been a pleasure chatting, Jay, and everyone else. Yes, I'm staying safe and healthy. Yeah, all right. See you later. See you in 2 weeks. And I final thing. I've just finished uni today, so there won't be a video this Sunday, but there will be next Sunday. I'll promise one for next Sunday. How about that? And it'll be on the time that I almost burnt down an entire stadium. That'll be a good video. All right. Bye-bye.